Hanging with Higgins, where author and former prosecutor John J. Higgins interviews his intriguing guests about their lives, knowledge, experiences, and projects. Explore, learn, and be entertained. Come, join us now. Good evening and welcome to Hanging with Higgins. I'm your host, John J. Higgins. Tonight I have an author who has written a novel about a woman's struggle through dysfunctional behaviors and addiction to recovery and health. Her book is titled A Gift of Desperation and can be found on Amazon and various other book sites. Her website is at www.robingilliamsart.com. That's ROBINGILLIAMSART.com. And she also has Facebook pages, and her author page will come up if you type in Gift of Desperation on Facebook. Welcome, Robin. How are you today?
I'm great, John. Thank you, and I'm excited to be joining you on this interview.
Well, it's my pleasure. Would you tell us something about yourself?
Sure. I was born and raised in Maryland. I went to Goucher College for the art therapy program they had there. I have a fine arts degree and a minor in psychology. I went off to New York City to do a master's in art therapy, which didn't work out because life happened. And then I returned home to Maryland and somehow became a CPA. And that's where I'm at today.
Always amazes me the path we take to get to what we end up doing. So what has interested you in the arts to the degree that you were studying it in college?
Art therapy. I've always liked art and creating. I think around the age of, I think it was in elementary school, they gave us a magazine about careers for women or something, and there was an article about art therapy. It was an up-and-coming art career, and it just struck me as what a wonderful thing to do to help people heal through artwork, and I was instantly hooked at that point. And after that, I just geared my studies around obtaining that goal.
I see. So that was in grammar school?
Yeah, in elementary school. Probably, I think it must have been fifth grade. I remember sitting at the table, and they gave out these magazines, and we looked through them, and I wish I still had saved that magazine article, but I definitely was, it was shown to me at that time at a very early age.
Yeah, that reminds me, back in my day, they had a thing called Weekly Reader, and that's what we used to get in school, and we would read that, and that had, I guess, contemporary stories and whatever. The one issue I remember was, I guess, dealing with drug abuse or something, but I think it was pretty naive back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So now, when you grew up in Maryland, was that like a rural area? Were you in a city?
I grew up in Columbia, Maryland, which at that time was an up-and-coming, almost an experiment. It was a very diverse community. My parents my dad especially wanted to move us there, so we were around different types of people to learn tolerance and patience with people. I grew up and went to Wild Lake High School when it still looked like a turtle, and it was an open space school, which meant the library was in the middle, and most of the classrooms were open within, like social study, all the classes were open, and it was kind of an experiment to see how we would do in that kind of a classroom. Needless to say, the turtle's been destroyed, and a new school has been added quite a few years ago, and I think it's more structured now. We were children of the 70s, so you can just use your imagination with that one.
Yeah. Well, I also produced a play that I brought to 170 high schools in New Jersey, so I've seen a variety of different structures in these buildings of what they tried to accomplish. Although some schools, I think, were stuck with overcrowding, and they were having classes in the hallway, while the school in the next town over closed off a wing because they didn't have enough students. That's how screwy New Jersey can be. But
yeah, if your boyfriend was in the next English class, it was so much more exciting to just stand up and look over the partitions and, hey, in a couple minutes, see you soon. It was a little distracting.
I can imagine. What did they ever do about the sound?
I don't even remember, but needless to say, we're going to talk about writing. That was not one of my favorite subjects back then, so I'm not sure. We'll get to it later, but it's interesting how I became a writer. I don't think I paid that much attention, and my old English teacher lives up the hill, like right behind my parents, so that's kind of funny too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us that story then?
Why
don't you tell us about how you got into writing then?
How I got into writing. I think I have originally got into writing as a technical writer with my job. As a ZP, I had to write technical accounting standards. So I started writing technical accounting standards and working with an editor, and I found that it wasn't too bad. I wasn't sure I ever could really express myself. When I was in college, I did not do well in writing. They would say write a 10-page paper, and I would kick out a 3-page paper. I just could not get the thoughts out. And I usually wouldn't get a very good grade on that, so it was a little intimidating. When I started writing accounting standards, I got better, and I had to be clear about what other people understood in relation to what they needed to do. And then I became the president of the Annapolis Quilt Guild, and I had to write an article every month about that. And I started to write and enjoy trying to figure out what I was going to say and make it enjoyable. I just didn't want to give them a lot of things to do, but, tell them a story around that month and what was going on. And the other thing that was interesting, I'm a collage artist. I did that up until the time I started quilting, and I started realizing that writing was kind of like collaging, where if I moved words around a certain way, I would get different messages or different meanings. And I actually started to enjoy writing then because it reminded me of moving pieces around in a collage until you got the picture to look like you wanted to. So writing to me became, how do I tell a story, and how do I make it interesting and exciting to people? So that's how I started writing. And about 8 years ago, I decided I was going to write a book. Yeah, I decided I was going to write a book. I had a message that I should write a book, and I started to do that.
When you were a child, were you like a storyteller? Did you have, I'm going to say fantasies. I think all kids do, but that were like stories that kept you occupied.
I did like to read, and the library was one of my favorite places. I just felt so safe in the library with the books, and it's still one of my favorite places. My favorite books back then, it's funny because the books the kids read now, Nancy Drew, I just love the Nancy Drew mysteries and how she was such a strong girl, and she wasn't scared, and she would go out there and solve things. And so I really liked the Nancy Drew series. And, when I was reading Nancy Drew, about the same age, when my niece was the same age, she was reading Harry Potter, which I just look at the size and the difference in those books, and there's quite a big difference in what we allow our children to read now. Not a bad thing, just a different thing.
No, that's true. When my folks, we were cleaning out houses, we were in the antique business, and I generally could take any book that I wanted because they were basically worthless when you tried to sell them back in the day. And I got hooked on the Tom Swift series, which was probably in the early 1900s to maybe 1930. And it was well written, I figured at the time, and it was very interesting to me. But I also read a lot of history and that kind of thing because I was very interested in what makes people tick, and history seems to tell me more of that a lot of times than what psychology does. But that's just my take on it, and I have a bachelor's in psychology, so it's not like I don't have exposure to both.
Right.
So now, were you kind of an introverted kid or like an extroverted kid?
I don't know about being when I was a kid. I guess kind of both. Probably more extroverted. I always liked to be out and about. I saw one of your questions was, am I introverted or extrovert? I could probably easier answer the question about today what I am.
Okay.
Today, I think I'm both. I talked to somebody recently and said it's where you get your energy from. It's not necessarily if you're shy or outgoing. It's really where do you get your energy from. So when I'm creating either artwork or quilts or the writing, I have to be introverted because I have to get the energy from being quiet. But then again, I love to present. I did a big presentation for work yesterday, and I just get a super charge from presenting and entertaining and teaching people information. So I probably am more, like 60-40, 60 extrovert, 40 introvert. But I find when I'm working and I need to be quiet, I need that quiet time, very quiet, to be able to process things.
Right. My understanding of it, really not in the common sense, more in the Jungian sense, is that it's the way you process, things. If you're introverted, you process pretty much alone. And if you're extroverted, you need to bounce things off other people to come to your conclusion. I think we've gotten a lot better with that because I think it is becoming much more of a blend. I don't know that people are solely one way or the other.
Last time I did my Myers-Briggs, the introvert extrovert. Last time I did my test, I weighed more on the introvert side, which really surprised me because have no problem talking to people. But you're right, I probably process a lot more quiet. I need to. I do bounce things off of people, but I also like to figure things out by myself.
Right. Well, I've taken that. Actually, I used that test for one of my research projects in college, and I had engineering and pre-med students that I was a resident advisor for, and then I was also on a counseling hotline. So I gave the test to two different, those different groups, and then I did the comparison. What the results were, I don't remember. It's a long time ago. But the thing for me is that I came out as an EFNP back in those days, and then after I started prosecuting, the P was perceiving, it changed to judging. So I think that there could be some kind of developmental thing that happens too on those tests. Yeah, it was an
ENTJ. I think that was the very first. For some reason, I remember that. I don't remember what the one was last time, but I remember the E and the J. So yeah, they're always interesting how they try to put us into a category, and a lot of times I find I'm not in any category.
Right. Well, I basically hate being compartmentalized myself, but it's the way it is. So now, when you were going to college, you were going to be an art therapist. You wanted to help other people. Was that the goal?
Yes, I wanted to help other people. Art therapy is, the way I understood it, and I did an internship then, and I wanted to work with children where they draw a picture and the art therapist is qualified to look and analyze the picture. What is the picture telling us? Is it an upside down house? Is there, are the children standing separate from their parents? Are the faces smiling? And then from that, they can use that as a diagnostic tool for some therapies. And they would work hand in hand with psychoanalysts and other types of therapists to diagnose. So the artwork helps the child to get out things, to express themselves, which they might not be able to say, oh, my mommy hits me, or this happened, or, I'm home alone with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but they might be able to draw you a picture of that. So you would be able to get some information through artwork that you probably would not be able to get because they've probably been told, don't talk about this.
Right. Well, that's really interesting because I do think the whole psychoanalytic method, which Freud basically started. I still think Freud's a genius, regardless of how people, pick on him over time. He at least, he started that whole movement pretty much. But there's a lot of things, particularly in children, that are nonverbal. They don't know how to verbalize things. So, the art might be a really great way of venting that problem.
I think now, with where I want to go, is with adults that have had trauma, especially maybe rape victims. There's a lot of shame and guilt, and we internalize that, and then it's like the trauma becomes us. And how do we get that out and move past that and realize that that's not us, it wasn't our fault, and be able to express those feelings through the artwork and techniques that I can teach, that I use to help me progress through my PTSD, so that we can get it out. Basically, you're only as sick as your secret, so we have to get it out. And then, I'm not a therapist, so I have to disclaim that I would not, if something comes out, that you're going to need to have a therapist or somebody else to help deal with it, but at least some kind of techniques. And the creativity is such a positive thing. I find people that create often are in better places because they're not just all stuck up in their head, spinning around and around and around, which is not a good place to be.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the weaknesses that remain in the 12-step programs. I think that they were genius when they wrote them in the 30s, but there is this, I don't know, like abnormal reliance on you being responsible for everything that happens. And I've said many times is that there are bad things that happen in the world that, the person has nothing to do with other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And, they played no part in what happened to them.
I think with the 12 steps that it's a very good structure. And when you get to the self-inventory, it's digging down to what are the fears, doubts, and insecurities that drive those behaviors. Even though we're not responsible for what happened to us, the domestic violence or the rape or the abuse or abandonment, whatever happened to us is not our responsibility, but how we've reacted to that is our responsibility. And so if we're continuing to live in the fear I always talk to people, what is that trigger? What went off in your head that caused you to pick up whatever the substance or the activity was? What were you trying to shove down that you were afraid of? So it's really getting to the fears and the foundation below that and taking responsibility for that. Not necessarily taking responsibility for what happened to us, but the reaction to what happened, to how we keep reacting to it and the bad behavior that we keep having around it, which is the story of Claire in my book, Gift of Desperation.
Right, but you also need somebody cognizant enough that they know to go back to that. One of the problems in these deep, dark secrets is that people bury them and they don't reveal them. And some of the inventory techniques that they're kicking around today, I don't think it was so true years ago, is going back to the basics where they don't use all the sophistication that developed for, at least for a time that people knew that they really needed to deal with their whole life, not just lists. But that's just my opinion.
Right, and I agree, and I think that in working through quite a few of those, that a lot, and in a lot of different formats, that you have to be very careful, and that people have to be willing, honest, open, and willing to walk through the process. It's a painful process. People have to be willing to want to make those changes, and I see different people in different levels and different stages. A lot of denial and a lot of lying that goes on to protect ourselves. So again, my challenge is I'm learning how, because I'm just bringing up this business, so how am I going, and the Gift of Desperation was the first piece. How do I become a facilitator? I'm not an art therapist, so I'm still grieving over that, but obviously people have told me that it's more than just, a couple little letters on a piece of paper. There's the experience, strength, and hope, and how do I teach people this and then let it go? I'm just the messenger. I'm just the facilitator. Here's what worked for me, and if it's supposed to work for them, it will. And, I'm not responsible for the results in anybody else's life, but I am available to teach people about, how this has helped me.
Right. Well, that's always the best. Leading by example to me is always the best teacher. So, there's a lot of people who talk a lot of theory, but they don't live that. And, I think that there's a sense of, hypocrisy that people pick up on, and therefore they become basically ineffective. So, everything's got to line up, both nonverbal, verbal, and in some ways even spiritual. So, it's an integrated process when you think about it. So now, when you were in college, were they teaching you to that degree?
They were actually. That's one of the reasons I chose Goucher College, was they had a specific art therapy program. There was only a few bachelor programs in art therapy. Actually, it was a combination. You had to take fine arts and then you had to take psychology. It wasn't at that time integrated. That's how they structured their program. And then when you got to the master's degree piece, it was actually an art therapy program. But that's how they structured it. So you took art classes and you took psychology classes. I can't remember if we actually had an art therapy class to tie things together. We might have. But it was more, they were kind of separated, and then you were supposed to bring them together in a master's program.
Right. Now, did that college offer that? I would think that would be specialized.
Goucher had some type of a master's, but the NYU, which is where I was accepted, they actually had one of the founders. Remember the lady's name, but there were a lot of the founding folks of this career or this type of therapy did resonate out of that New York, that NYU area.
Okay. Because before I went to law school, I was applying for clinical psych programs, and I know that there was a wide variety of approaches that they had across the country. I interviewed for some California schools, and I had gone to Rutgers, and Rutgers had, I guess it was a new degree back then, they were called PsyDs rather than PhDs. They were more practical. And, there was still a wide range of approaches that, but you definitely had to go to the right school, because if you had an approach that was different than what the school had, you were going to be really a misfit. And it was interesting that NYU had that, because that had to be on the cutting edge back in those days.
It
right?
was. It was around 84, 85. It was on the cutting edge.
So, did you go to NYU now, or did you change the CPA at that time?
Yeah. No, I did go to NYU. I actually was working at the medical center, so by the grace of God, it was a free program. It was a benefit of working at NYU. I worked at Bellevue for a year, and then I went to NYU. And I had started a master's program, but at the same time I was involved with a man, and that did not turn out to be a good situation. It was somebody I married, and it turned into a domestic violence situation, which ended in rape. And needless to say, and sadly to say, I did not finish my master's program. And it's probably one of the only things I did not follow through on, which still leaves a hole in my heart. But
well,
I think things happen for a reason, and not to say that rape is good, it's not, but I mean, I've learned things out of it. I actually now have, like you said, I have my own experience. I have, it's not theory. I actually can walk into a room and say, this is what I have done. These are the pieces I have done. This is what I learned from these pieces, and this is how I grew from them.
Right. Well, I also think that as time goes on, I was lucky to be able to retire as a statewide prosecutor, and I know there's a lot of people who retire that they think that after you retire, you sit on the couch, you eat bonbons, and watch, I guess it's Dr. Oz rather than Oprah today. And I always say, well, you might have an opportunity to do something else that you really want to do that you just don't need to do, for a living. So you never know how it may work itself out.
Yeah, and
right?
For any of your listeners, if you really pay attention to Social Security, let's hope it's there when we retire. So you might want to have some other plans around for making some money.
Well,
that's another discussion for another day.
all I know is that we always hear that we're broke, and then as soon as they want to start a war someplace, we have plenty of money.
Yeah.
So
well, that's an interesting theory. Yes, it comes out somewhere. Sometimes those things are called unfunded. So.
Right, but they were always willing to unfund the things that wreak havoc rather than the things that make people better. But that's my take on it. We put a man on the moon.
I should leave that one on the side, since that could be a whole. You can take that to your one discussion. I know you're on another radio show, so you can probably make one of your.
And I do.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be one of the major, problems today.
Yeah.
So now. When you were, how did you transfer from technical writing into, I guess, more, because really, I guess, fiction, because that is a switch to some degree. Did you have to struggle with that, or did it come easier now that you had the technical writing as a background?
The articles I was writing for the Annapolis Quilt Guild helped to transition, but I was going to originally write a self-help book, with art and healing and the 12 steps, and I got to like the third step and I got stuck. And then I thought, I got a message that said, let's write a novel instead, because I know with self-help books, and they're great, and a lot of people do them, and, you get to the third or fourth chapter, and then it gets hard, you don't do it, right? You say,
right.
Okay, thanks, but I thought a novel, if I had a story of somebody who people could relate to, it would probably make more of an impact. So I changed it over to a novel. I don't know if a lot of this. I had written about 3 or 4, maybe about a third of the self-help book, and then I started moving into this. And that was interesting because I used my own artwork. I did abstract collages for quite a long time, and I took pictures of everything, and it was probably really before the camera I have now, the iPhone, and I printed them out, and I taped them in a book, and I wrote down what an artist would have said about it, and then I wrote down what a curator would have, what they would have said. I went to art museums. My character is set at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. That's a real museum in New York for women artists. So I went there quite a few times. I looked at how they wrote up artwork. I got books on writing up artwork. Now, the switch, I'm already a CPA now. The switch from being an artist, I've always been an artist, but to a CPA. So the CPA is really the analytical side of me. I have a very right brain, left brain thing going on. So in writing the book, there was a lot of analytics. and analyzing how to put the material and the information together. And then it was learning, John, how to put it into a story. And I worked with an English teacher, Laura Schnebbia, who wrote Solomon's Puzzle in Annapolis, and she helped me to do that, to, take it from being too technical into a story that people, show people. Don't tell them what Claire is saying. Show them, write some way so that, Claire feels like she's got like a volcano. Okay, now she's going to explode instead of Claire's really angry. So I had to learn to do some of that. And that became kind of fun, trying to find, not synonyms, but, pictures or how to describe a picture so you got a feeling for Claire, like steam coming out of her nose. I don't know. You have to read the book. There's a couple funny things. Towards the back of the book, after she starts to get into recovery, a number of places I wrote, oh, she just wanted a drink so bad. And then my niece said, oh, that is so boring. I mean, why does she keep wanting a drink? And I thought, well, you're only 16. You're not going to understand. But so I started to come up with some really funny things. Like she was watching television and there was a beer commercial and the beer started like floating out of the television, or it started to talk to her, or there was a wedding at the National Museum of Women's Arts and they were cleaning up the glasses and the glasses started talking to her, or there was something in a painting and it like floated out. So I got really creative with what does it feel like to an addict or an alcoholic when you're not using anymore, but you get a thought and you want to use. What does that feel like? What does that look like? How hard is it to not do it? So that I don't know. I guess the creativity just started coming out, and I just actually started having a lot of fun with trying not to make it boring, because my niece was right. It was boring, to say I got a thought about drinking, and so I had like 5 scenes afterwards that were all very funny. One scene, her sponsor's walking by, and she's getting ready to walk into this bar. She thinks she hears people say, "Come on, Claire, come on and party." Her sponsor calls her, and there's music, the SOS from Rihanna, and it says, someone come and rescue me. And her sponsor's like, "Step away from the bar." And and Claire's looking around. She's like, "Well, how do you know?" And she's like, "'Cause I'm standing right behind you," or something like that.
Right.
So
right.
I tried to make it entertaining, and so that's how the novel was born. Is I wanted people to enjoy the book. I made it around alcohol and sex because most people can relate to that. Those are not my drugs of choice, but that's hers.
Right.
Some people think this is an autobiography. It's not. Just the artwork is mine. Even there's some diary entries in there about the artwork that are similar. They are based on stuff I've gone through, but they're not mine. They're the artists in the book. And so I wanted to make it fun. I wanted to also impact. There's some hard stuff. There were some very hard pieces I had to write through. Do a lot of praying through. It was painful to write through some of the stuff I had to write through because she had to hit her gift of desperation to make the change.
And I basically know what a gift of desperation is, but why don't you tell the listeners what your sense of that is?
Gift of desperation is a term that comes out of the big book. I'm not sure who termed it, but it is your bottom. How low are you willing to go until you're ready to make a change? And it says in the promises that, how far down on the scale. So it's, did you go to jail and that was the bottom line, or did you just get unmanageable and you couldn't manage your job anymore? Everybody's bottom is different as far as what they have to experience and how much pain they have to experience before they just say enough is enough. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and so it's a gift. You have to how much desperation can you handle until it's a gift and you say, okay, I'm ready to change. And then whatever that change is, what are you willing to do to keep moving up and away from that desperation? How'd I do?
Right. Pretty good.
That's a hard one. Try to write a novel around what does that look like? What does that feel like? Are people going to understand it and feel it? Because that's it. You want somebody, either a professional dealing with an addict or an addict reading it, to say, okay, maybe you touch somebody and they say, wow, that's about as much as I can take.
Right. The only thing I would add is it seems to me it's with that desperation is that the person is willing to change anything and everything to not be where they are. And because, you take somebody who's, at whatever age, they start using, I do believe they freeze emotionally at that age, and then years later, that substance or liquid, whatever, gets the person to a point that, they've hit a bottom or their life has become absolutely intolerable. Now they have to change, whatever they've been doing for most of their life. And for most addicts and alcoholics that I've ever met, that substance has become their best friend. And you're trying to take them from their best friend because they don't see it as the cause of the problem generally.
Yeah, and the behaviors, there's a lot of defense behaviors.
Absolutely.
My opinion, just my opinion, is that there's always seems to be a trauma behind it. There are, it can be genetic too, where somebody picks up a glass of wine at 12 and they're off and running just because their bodies are set that way. But a lot of times I find that there is some horrible, uncomfortable trauma that has happened, or a number of traumas that have happened that people don't want to deal with. So could be years and years and years of defense mechanisms, including the using. And how do we dig ourselves out of that? It's not easy. That's why, the second part of the back of the book, or the second part is, all these scenes where you don't just decide to change and the thoughts go away.
Right.
And I don't know if addiction counselors realize, I'm sure they do, that, you've always got to be managing that. That's why they say one day at a time. On one day at a time, you have to be able to manage. And it might be 1 minute at a time, because you could see something could trigger you in a store, or somebody could say something, and all of a sudden your mind takes over and it's a bad place. And what do? Do you move into a tool we've learned somewhere, or do you go back to the liquor store? It's a split-second decision. What do you do?
Right.
And it's so easy to make that left-hand turn instead of that right-hand turn, right?
Yeah. Well, back in the day when I worked at the governor's office in the 80s, and we changed the whole substance abuse system and whatever. One of the things we did back in those days was we forced the insurance companies to do 30-day rehabs. And then, of course, as governors change, they keep eking it down, so that, now they're back down to 5-day detoxes and whatever. And, my experience has been there are some people that need to be in long-term treatment only to break the back of those old habits. And just getting the substance out of somebody isn't enough, for them to change that behavior.
There's a certain percentage that coming out of rehabs that it's a very small, what's it, 2% or something to that effect?
Oh, I don't even know what the numbers are. All I know is that most people, the success rate is not high. It's a difficult thing to deal with. It's not easy. There's no guaranteed methodology, I think, that really works for everybody. And we still are in the dark ages in many ways with, how to deal with the addictions.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my opinion. I think we need a lot more research, and we need to keep working at it. It's not something that you just throw up your hands, because we lose a lot of really talented people. I know we discussed, before, we came on about, you're talking about the heroin problem. I mean, it has gone rampant across the country, and I don't know how you socially use heroin, but for some reason that has gotten down into the teenage years, and people least equipped to deal with any of those decisions are now all of a sudden in something that's extremely deadly. Very deadly, yes.
It's very sad. We have a new governor in Maryland, and that was one of the first things, is setting up a heroin and opiate task force. So, of which I sent him my book. I think my book would be a great tool for those, practitioners and legal folks that, might need to understand, not that they don't understand it from a theoretical point of view, but again, I think the story behind Claire would be a great asset for some type of a situation, a task force like that.
Well, I agree with you on the idea of using a novel rather than a self-help book, because you really need to pull people into the emotions and, the experience of what somebody goes through. Because if somebody does not have that problem, it is basically something they can't understand. I used to say to people about people continuing on an addiction route. It's not like they get up in the morning and they decide that they want to get high and free. It's generally they wake up in pain because they are in withdrawal from whatever that drug is. So whatever they're doing is they're taking another dose of that substance to get normal at that stage. And that's where it becomes a never-ending cycle. And I use the example with Earth people when I would say, imagine yourself waking up with the worst flu you've ever had, which is generally withdrawal symptoms, right? The hot, cold sweats and the shakes and the nausea and, the feeling of, you just, everything in your body aches. And if I said to you, if I gave you NyQuil and that would go away, would you take it? Well, absolutely.
Right.
Right? So for them, it's whatever that substance is, and that's what they do. But, unfortunately, breaking that is so difficult that, your term, a gift of desperation, has to affect somebody to the degree that they're willing to try something absolutely different and trust that people know that they can get to the other side, right?
Yeah, and that the novel has been successful in that way. Everybody that reads it loves Claire. They want to know at the end of the book when the next book's coming out because they want to know what happens to Claire. I mean, it ends fine, but there is there's a little indication that there might be more.
Right.
So people do love Claire and they relate to Claire, and I see her as a role model. And there's another character in there, and it's interesting. You're a writer also. How you think you have an idea for a book or a character, and then they come into your mind and tell you that something else is going to happen. So there's another. Right. Claire has a best friend. Her name is Evie, and short for Evelyn, and she comes home as a wounded warrior. She's lost a leg, and she's had her own struggles, and she dove. She was an alcoholic and was diving, and she was able to find some recovery. So she's actually a helper for Claire. She's not her sponsor. But Evie moves in, and Claire doesn't know about the leg, and so there's some secrets going back and forth, and Evie knows how much she can do for Claire, and she also knows how much she needs to let Claire make her own decisions. So that's the other part of the book, that kind of like what we just talked about. People have to make their own decisions. So it's also a lesson in what do you do when you're on the outside looking in, but you love somebody. It's like her sister. You love somebody so much you want to help them, but you can't force the solution. You've got to wait until they're ready. And so from Evie is like that professional person, or that person that kind of says, she has experience to give Eve, but she also has to wait until Eve gets to the point of her gift of desperation. I'm not going to tell you what that is. You have to read it because, Claire has to, fall on the floor and finally accept, just find herself in a mess before she can finally say, yeah, I can't do this anymore. And then Evie can pick her up and take her for some help. But until then, Evie has to sit by and be quiet and watch her. And that's the hardest thing to do when you love somebody. Those are the principles of Al-Anon. That's the very hard thing, to sit there and watch and wait, and just somebody else has to find their gift of desperation. That's the other piece of this book that's important for people who are reading it, that maybe have somebody in that they need to get into recovery, or somebody that they hope to get into recovery, but it's like if the court says, okay, you're going to go to this program for 30 days, you're right. If they're not ready, that 30 days is just going to be, a little time out while they're planning and making phone calls to their dealer, right? Yeah, I'm going to be out of here in 5 days. Meet me on the street corner.
Right.
So that's the other piece of the book. Evie is a very important. She was just going to be kind of a minor character to bounce, but she turned out to, and she became a wounded warrior. I didn't know what she was going to be, but I work in D.C., I see a lot of the homeless. I see some of the wounded warriors. I hear a lot, and for some reason I wanted her to be a woman because, again, strong women is important to me.
Right.
So there's that piece of the story that weaves itself into Claire's story also.
Well, like you say, it is really amazing how what you think is a minor character can all of a sudden take on a life all their own, and then influence everything else that happens in the story, which to me is like a wonderful experience, for the writer.
Mm-hmm.
Like my novels, I wish I could read my novels without knowing what I wrote.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Right. I mean, there's a couple chapters I cry at. I cry at the end. I cry in the middle. And I'm like, okay, every time I read this part, I know I'm going to cry. I mean, it's my book, but I'm going to cry.
Right. We see I had a parallel thing with the angels. Was I was trying to find a book that gave the story of the angels. I figured there was one out there, that was written by some monk or something, and there really wasn't. The only thing was Milton's, Paradise Lost.
Oh, I love that book. Yeah.
And so when I did I started doing the research, because I think you're like I am in some ways. If you do technical writing, you do research, and you go through it all, and you go, ooh, there's some really fascinating things here that don't fit into the common knowledge. But if I wrote just a history of them, it would be pretty boring. So that's why I decided to novelize. And I think that works a lot better because you can communicate so much more by it makes sense of a lot of things rather than just providing, the technical information or one fact after another or one myth after another. So, very, very powerful. The other thing I was thinking, too, is that, I've seen so many people really, they harm the person they love by trying to fix them before they're ready. And, they fix whatever the problem is and they go right back at it. So, sometimes you got to trust the professionals to tell you and not jump in and fix the problem for the person. Although I am a firm believer that if the courts put somebody in a rehab or whatever, sometimes you've got to do it 5 times before it will finally catch. You just can't give up. My biggest problem with methadone maintenance programs in New Jersey, I fought with them so much, was that, to me the idea was you put them on there, wean them off. You put them on it, you wean them off. You don't constantly keep them on it. But, in terms of advocacy, they started to rely on those people as their, quote, clients. And that gave them clout when they were in front of the legislature saying, well, I have, 20,000 clients in my – and I'm sitting here going, well, you're failing with 20,000. You're not a success story here.
Mm. Yeah.
So, and then in our approach that we did in New Jersey eventually was that, we created a coordinating council because, the addictions affect families and, different systems in ways that you just couldn't put it in one department, that it really had to stretch across, many disciplines to be able to, have a significant effect on it. And I don't know if Maryland has a coordinating council. I'd be surprised if they don't somewhere. But, each state is different. That's why we have 50 of them.
I think with all the problems they have some type of coordination. Like I said, they just implemented a heroin and opiate task force to try to deal with this problem and I love what the governor said, it's not an imprisonment problem, it's a recovery problem. Just throwing people in prison is not going to solve the problem. So they are taking a recovery approach to it. I don't know what that is. I'm actually reaching out to see if I can be of any service to that task force, and we'll see. If it's meant to be, then it'll be. If the book is meant to get to them, it will. I can just do my marketing piece and, hope the pitch hits home. And that's all I can do.
Right. Well, I know in New Jersey we even have law enforcement running around with their Narcolon or something, some kind of antidote kits now.
Yes, they just passed that law in Maryland that if somebody's having a heroin overdose, they can give them this and it will stop them from dying.
Right, which makes a lot more sense than what we've been doing. And, I come from the school of thought that when we created drug-free school zones, we had done it to get the drugs out of the school because in the early 80s, I don't know if Maryland had changed the drinking age, but New Jersey had. So we dropped the drinking age to 18, which meant that seniors were going out at lunchtime and getting a little bit sauced before they came back to the school. And that level of freedom, of course, allowed more in terms of, drugs coming in. And, I mean, if you really think about it, for young people, the school is really the drug marketplace. So that's where we came up with mandatory sentences and that. But that was only the first stage. Unfortunately, the Attorney General I worked for never made it into the governor's office. So, we never implemented the next sets of pieces. So we wound up with inner cities where there might be a 2-square-foot area that was not in the drug-free school zone. Oh. So it meant that all of these mandatory sentences were being applied, and we were locking up everybody rather than getting them treatment, which is really what should have happened next. But I think society it's dawning on everyone that the war on drugs is got to be revised. We've got to rethink what we're doing so that we're not locking up so many people.
Right, and now the states are starting to legalize marijuana, which makes me laugh because, they'll get they'll be able to control the revenue of it, but now you're going to have people that think it's okay to use it, but then they can't go on their jobs high. So now the jobs have to come behind the companies and do drug tests and say it's still not okay for you to use the drug. Because if you come in and you test positive, guess what? You're going to be losing your job. So it's now society is shifting to placing that responsibility on the companies to ensure that they don't want people, just like you're not supposed to come to work drunk, you're not supposed to come to work high or have any residual effects. So it's going to be interesting to see how society responds to these types of legalizations.
Right. And I used to, back in the day when we were doing drug-free school zones, we had a professor or something out of Princeton, which is also in New Jersey, that was arguing about legalizing and whatever. And the only way I would do that debate was basically I would say, well, at what age are you going to legalize it? We changed the drinking age back to 21. So if it's at 21, do you really think you get rid of the black market? Because most people who are starting to use that substance are kids. So it's still, the black market still exists. It's not like you remedied the problem. And I don't know that locking them up for long periods of time is the way to deal with it either. But when you think about the residual effects of marijuana, unless the research has changed drastically, it really has a build-up effect for a lot of people where it just doesn't leave the body and starts to coat, the neurons. Mm-hmm. Has a tendency of making people extremely stupid. Yes. It just does. I mean, it may not be violent, but it certainly does not increase their intelligence level. They have no short-term memory. They become like Alzheimer's patients. But
that's very scary, isn't it?
It is, and those are tough things that we've got to wrestle with. But I also believe we're Americans. We could put a man on a moon, so if we exert the right will, we can solve almost any problem. But we've got to it's got to be a continued, focused effort. It can't keep changing from one administration to the next. That it's not a 4-year or 8-year problem. It's probably a couple of decades that it has to have one direction in it.
Right. It's not a political issue. It is a societal issue that needs to be dealt with maturely within politics.
Yes. And as soon as you get money into it, it kilters everything. So, whatever's cost-effective for an insurance company is not necessarily what's best for the patient. But,
right.
That's a whole other discussion.
Right.
So, with your character Claire, I guess you must be pretty attached to her by now.
Yeah, we're buddies. She has more of a story. I have 2 more novels I want to write in all of my free time. It's hard to write and blog, and so trying to find that balance. I have written into the second book. There's 2 stories. There's 2 more stories I want to tell. Or Claire's story is not finished. Let me put it that way. So we have more stuff that we need to go through and continuing to follow her recovery and getting better. And we're going to be moving into, I don't want to tell you, but if you've read my first book, you can email me or blog, let me know if you know where we're going in the second novel, because there's a hint in the first novel as to where the next one's going to be set. And all the characters are picking up and moving to this new place. I will tell you, my husband and I have always had this kind of dream of having a facility, like a recovery facility, where you bring people in, or domestic violence, and you bring people in and you teach them skills, and you help them to heal, and you take them from a battered, bruised person to a productive member of society. And how does that happen? So Claire will be a tool for that while she herself continues to heal from what's going on with her. And in a novel, you have to have the ups and downs, and everything's going great, and you have to have something bad, and you have to figure out the ups and downs and the hills. So, and Claire is going to actually be developing, and I'm going to continue the art and healing theme through the whole thing, because that's really important to me, and how that will help with people as one of their tools as they get in clients or people. And of course, just like domestic violence patients, just like, they have to get to a point, they have to hit their gift of desperation, because when is the last time they're going to be hit? When is the last time they're going to watch their children be hit before they're ready to actually get the courage to walk out of that thing and realize it's not their fault? We're giving messages in those kind of situations that it's our fault and we deserve it. And, but they love us because they're going to give us flowers or something else afterwards. It's just a horrible, horrible cycle. And how do we help break that cycle? And how do we help bring women, usually, and I'm sure it's not just women. I mean, we've got all sorts of relationships out there, heterosexual, homosexual. I mean, there's got to be, all this is going on in all sorts of different types of relationships where one person's going to be a batterer and one person's going to be an abuser. And what does that look like when somebody finally gets the courage to walk out? And what are the people like that are helping her? So it's a little community we're going to build there. And you'll see all the characters develop. Evie will be there. She in my first book is a medic. She's a medic from the war, so she's going to carry on as like the medical director, and then Claire will carry on with the art stuff because she was the curator, so she's going to curate this art and healing program. And then her sponsor comes out, and she's I think she'll probably be the social worker or something. And there's another character, Herb. He's a minor character. And if Herb's listening, I have to tell him to listen. He's actually a character based on my bus driver who wanted to be my commuter bus driver into D.C., who's got the greatest personality. He's like a little angel for Claire. So he's coming too. He wanted a lake to retire on, so we're going to let him partially retire in my next book. So that's the other thing fun you can do with characters. If people are really interested, you can build them in. And he always has the funniest things to say. Like this morning he said, it just takes too much energy to be grumpy. So we'll put that in the next book, and somebody else said, I'm still in the game. I'm still batting. The balls are still coming, but I'm still batting. So I wrote down a couple of the funny things he said this morning, and he just came back off of having surgery, so we're really excited to have him back. And so he's always like, am I going with you into the second book? I'm like, you're coming, Herb. And his name is Herb in the book. He's not the bus driver. He's a kind of like a maintenance facility kind of guy. That's what he helped Claire set up the shows at National Museum of Women in the Arts, and was always there when she was hitting bottom, or so she thought, she spilled something or she was crying, and he just happened to miraculously always be there.
Right.
So,
like a guardian angel.
Yes, he was like her guardian angel. Yes, exactly. And we do have guardian angels. Sometimes they're in people. You talked about that with one of the person you did the interview with about the Reiki, your neighbor. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but there was a lot of discussion about angels, and you had said you see them. I don't know if I'm courageous enough to see them, but I can feel them. I get like a chill almost. I can feel my angel. I've been protected quite a few times from with the help of angels. I mean, I got thrown off a horse about 4 or 5 years ago on a nice, calm horse ride. That the horse got scared and went galloping off, and I was a Christopher Reeves moment, and I got up and walked away from that. I've had things like that happen a lot because I know there's somebody there protecting me, and it's that belief and that faith is so incredible. It's just so incredible.
So it's always nice to talk to people who are cognizant of those little strange events that happen in life that that you were protected somehow.
Well, I also think that meeting people is meant to be like, people always say, oh, yeah, I got a connection off of Twitter. Well, I met you on Twitter. I guess somehow we followed each other or friended each other, whatever it's called. And I don't know, I wrote back to you and I saw your interview, and we have a lot in common. And those kind of things, I can see our relationship going way past this interview. We have a lot of things a lot of work I think we need to do in the future together. And these things are not accidents at all.
No, I'm a firm believer in that. I've always said that the Almighty will put in front of you whoever you need at the time. It's it's mystical or spiritual in its own sense, and I think we need to be cognizant of it and appreciative of it.
Yeah, one thing that's funny is I always tell people who are struggling with something, and that's the other thing in recovery is the patterns of behavior, the people you keep getting attracted to. You keep picking up the same patterns, and I tell people, God is going to put people in your life. If you need patience, you're going to keep getting opportunities in your life to be patient. You're going to keep getting people that aggravate you and make you not patient so you can learn how to be patient. It's a very hard concept for people to pick up, but it's like, now I can just laugh. I'll say, that's very funny, and I guess this person was put in my life to aggravate me because I need to learn a lesson about blah, blah. And yes,
right.
I guess I am very cognizant, and I'm very blessed in that way to have that ability.
Well, I always say that God has a strange sense of humor.
Oh, me too, sometimes.
The one thing I have learned to do in my life is to say I would never do that, because within 3 days I am stuck in whatever position that is.
Oh, I know. I know. I'll look up and I'll go, very funny. Very funny. Yeah, right. Never say never, because that's exactly when it's going to happen.
Exactly. Well, you just did a blog on humility and being humble, right?
Yes, I did.
Which is a concept that not very many people understand.
Right. I had we were studying that in a 12-step study I was doing on the 7th step, and then Joel Osteen, I hope I say his name last, Joel had a little blurb in his Facebook, and I thought, see, I'm supposed to be talking about humility and humiliation. And then sometimes I get an idea and I was like, I don't know what to write, and people get stuck and then they don't write, but I pray. The power of prayer is really important. I say, okay, if you want me to write about this, I'm going to be quiet and you tell me what to write. And then all of a sudden, and then I do a dump, and some of your questions that you sent me were, what would I talk about to a new writer? Just dump it out there. It ain't going to be perfect, people. Just dump it out there, and then go back and edit it, and edit it, and edit it again until ask yourself, what is the message you're trying to tell people? And how do you want to, and then I keep editing it until I get the message that I want to say. Also weaving in some of my story, because of course the blogging is, without being a hard hit marketing, but you still want to get them to recognize the book or whatever else, other services or products that are out there to help them.
Absolutely. No,
so did you read the blog? Did it hit home any?
I haven't had a chance to read it, to be honest with you. I've been scrambling. It took me forever to do an edit yesterday because the phone rang in the middle of my last recording. I think I told you.
Yeah.
So it got a little tricky. But the one thing is that you learn, at least for me, I've always learned whatever I needed to learn to get whatever I needed accomplished. So
yeah, and one thing I will say. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think that's one of the basic definitions of humility, is to remain teachable. So if I don't know how to do it, then I go and I learn, and then I hit it again. Yeah,
one of my favorite people will say, well, how did you know how to do that? I said, I just made it up till I figured it out. Just make it up. Do your research. Step into it. One thing I will tell readers or listeners is that I try to keep my blog short. If I open somebody's blog and it's a novella, I'm not going to read it. I don't have time to read a novella, or pages and pages. I try to keep it to a few paragraphs. I try to throw a picture in there because, the pictures sometimes speak more than anything else. Now, the picture I put, and I'm starting to roll out the pictures that were pictures of my artwork that are in my book, and I'll probably do a catalog so people can see the actual pictures that are in the book. But it's funny, when I open up my blog in my iPad, the picture went sideways. But it's kind of like
I hate to cut you off, but we're almost out of time, so I want to give you an opportunity to tell us how to get in touch with you. Okay.
You can get in touch with me, as he said, on my website, which is www.robingilliamsart.com. That's ROBINGILLIAM, as in Mary, S, art, ART.com. You can also email me at robins, ROBINS, .ART, @verizon.net. I have a Facebook page. I have a book page for the book, Gift of Desperation. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, and that's as far as I've gotten with social media.
Great. All right, I'll be right back with you.
Thank you.
For those listening, I want to say thanks to our-truth.com for broadcasting this show. You can find more information about me and my book series, The Archangel Jeremiel and the War to Conquer Heaven, at www.john-j-higgins.com, and the website for this radio show, which is www.hangingwithhiggins.com. And with that, I will say good night.